The safe's door gaped open like a dare. She froze in the silence. Her reflection in the steel glaring back. Was this trust or a trap? The morning sun spilled over the sprawling glass walls of Ward Estate, but its warmth never seemed to touch Ethan Ward. He sat at the head of a 12-foot mahogany table, a single plate in front of him, untouched scrambled eggs, cooling toast, and coffee black enough to match the mood that clung to him like a second skin. His phone buzzed once, then again. Emails, stock updates, reminders from his assistant. He ignored them all. His gaze instead drifted to the far corner of the room, to the heavy vault door embedded in the wall. Polished steel, always locked, a silent witness to his life. Inside, millions sat in neatly banded stacks, symbols of success, symbols of protection, symbols of the fact that over the years you could never really trust anyone. Ethan had learned that the hard way, first from a business partner who siphoned funds from their company, then from a fiancé who had taken her ring and half his trust fund to start a new life somewhere sunny. People always had a price. Always. In another part of the city, Amara Johnson slipped into her crisp black uniform and knotted her hair into a bun so tight it pulled at her scalp. She left her tiny apartment with its flickering hallway light, locking the door behind her. The morning air smelled faintly of diesel and fried dough from the corner bakery. Amara worked 3 jobs, 2 part-time and 1 full-time, the latter being at Ward Estate. It paid better than most, but it came with the constant hum of being watched, weighed and judged, not by cameras necessarily, but by the eyes of wealth, which could be more cutting than any lens. She'd been at it for nearly 2 years, long enough to know Ethan's routines, his habits, even the way he set down his coffee cup with a controlled precision. He wasn't cruel, but there was a wall around him, a cold, impenetrable thing, and she'd learned to keep her own wall just as high. By the time she arrived at the estate, the sun was higher, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The driveway was lined with imported maple trees whose leaves barely dared to fall out of place. She stepped inside through the service entrance, the faint scent of lemon polish and expensive cologne hitting her immediately. Marta, the cook, gave her a tired smile from the kitchen. "Morning, Amara." "He's in the dining room," Marta whispered, as though speaking too loudly might crack the fragile air of the house. Amara nodded, slipping past with the silent efficiency of someone used to being invisible. In the dining room, Ethan glanced up briefly as she entered, then back down at his phone. She set about her work, dusting shelves, straightening picture frames, running a cloth over the gleaming surface of the sideboard. If Ethan noticed the faint slump in her shoulders, he didn't show it. If Amara noticed the untouched breakfast, she didn't ask. They lived in a dance of polite detachment. She never lingered, he never pried. But today, as Ethan sipped his coffee, a thought formed in his mind, sharp, deliberate, and a little cruel. What if... He'd done it before with contractors, assistants, even his own cousin once, leaving something valuable within reach to see what they'd do. A private test, a small thrill in a life otherwise sterile. He set his cup down, the faint click echoing in the stillness. "Amara," he said, his voice smooth but unreadable, "make sure the study gets extra attention today. I'll be out for a few hours." Her eyes flicked to his, then away. "Yes, sir." By noon, Ethan was gone, the low growl of his Aston Martin fading down the driveway. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. In the study, Amara opened the double doors, inhaling the faint scent of leather and cedar from the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She began dusting, starting with the top shelves, working her way down. And then she saw it, the safe. It was open, not wide, but just enough for the light to catch on what was inside. Bundles of cash, crisp and perfect, and a gleam of diamonds in a black velvet pouch. For a moment, she froze. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second dragging like a heavy chain. She stepped closer. Not because she wanted the money, God knew she didn't, but because her stomach tightened with something sharper than temptation. This was no accident. Someone like Ethan didn't forget to lock a safe. The insult settled over her like dust, fine, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. Her reflection stared back at her in the steel door, eyes darker than usual, mouth pressed into a line. She took a deep breath, reached out, and with a firm but measured motion, pushed the door shut until it clicked. Then she turned away, her heart still tight in her chest. If someone you worked for tested your integrity without telling you, would you confront them, walk away, or prove them wrong in silence? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk trust. Ethan Ward sat in his car, engine idling in the private parking garage beneath his downtown office building, phone balanced in his palm. He wasn't checking emails. He wasn't reading market reports. Instead, he was streaming live footage from the estate's internal security system, a habit he'd never admit aloud. The grainy camera in the study captured Amara dusting the shelves, methodical as always. Then she reached the desk. The safe sat partially open, an invitation dressed as carelessness. Ethan leaned forward, thumb hovering over the pause button, as if that might still the moment. She stopped, looked. For a heartbeat, he swore she was going to reach inside. The tiniest movement of her hand toward the gap sent a jolt through him. Not excitement exactly, but something sharper, hungrier. Instead, she simply shut it, firmly, deliberately. No hesitation. Ethan sat back, exhaling slowly. But it wasn't pride or relief flooding his chest. It was confusion. Her posture, straight-backed but heavy. Her face, impassive but shadowed. He'd seen enough people walk away from money to know the difference between indifference and insult. Amara wasn't unaffected. She was offended. Back at the estate, Amara carried on with her duties, each motion clipped, precise, like she was keeping herself from shattering something. She didn't linger in the study a second longer than necessary. When Ethan returned late that afternoon, she was in the kitchen with Marta, wiping down the counters. "Afternoon," he said casually, stepping inside. "Good evening, sir," Amara replied without looking at him, her voice polite but hollow. He paused. Normally, she'd at least meet his eyes when speaking. "Everything in order today?" "Yes, sir." That was it. No small updates about the pantry, no quiet note about the roses blooming in the garden, things she usually mentioned in passing. Ethan almost asked if she'd noticed anything unusual, but the words died before reaching his tongue. That night, in his study, he poured himself a whiskey and replayed the footage again. Her hesitation, the way she shut the safe, that faint tightening in her jaw. It should have satisfied him. The test was passed, but instead, it gnawed at him, burrowing under his skin. Why had it mattered to him how she felt? The next morning, their dance of detachment continued. She moved through the halls like a ghost in black, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Ethan found himself watching her longer than usual, waiting for a crack in the mask she wore. At one point, as she polished the silver tray in the living room, he caught her reflection in the glass window. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, then dropped again. No hostility, no warmth, just distance. It irritated him more than he expected. Later that day, he intercepted her in the hallway outside the study. "Amara," he said, his tone casual but probing. "How long have you been working here now?" "Almost 2 years, sir. And in all that time, I've never had a reason to doubt you." Her eyes met his then, and for the first time since the test, he saw the quiet storm behind them. "Good to know," she said flatly, before stepping past him. The words were polite. The delivery was not. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the echo of her voice clinging to him like smoke. That evening, Marta found Amara in the pantry, staring at the rows of neatly labeled jars. "You okay?" Marta asked softly. Amara forced a smile. "Just tired." But inside she was anything but tired. She was disappointed that even after nearly 2 years of honest work, she was still just another suspect in her employer's eyes. She hadn't touched the money. Not because she feared getting caught, but because she'd promised herself long ago she wouldn't let desperation dictate her morals. And yet, the sting of being tested without cause lingered. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in the study, swirling the last inch of whiskey in his glass. His gaze flicked to the safe. What had he been hoping for? To catch her stealing, to prove himself right about people. Instead, all he'd done was build another wall between them. But why did that matter so much now? He set the glass down and rubbed his temples. This wasn't over. Do you think Ethan should admit to Amara that he left the safe open on purpose? Or would that make things worse? Comment below. Your take might just be the next plot twist. The next 3 days passed like a chess match no one wanted to admit they were playing. Moves and counter-moves. Avoidance as strategy. Ethan noticed Amara was more efficient than ever, her work spotless, her timing precise, her presence nearly invisible. If she was in the same room as him, she was on the far side of it. If he entered a room, she'd find a reason to leave within minutes. It was infuriating. Not because she was failing at her job, if anything she was performing flawlessly, but because she was treating him like a stranger. On the 4th morning, he lingered in the kitchen as she loaded the dishwasher. "You've been quiet lately," he said, leaning against the counter. "Just keeping busy," she replied, without looking up. Her tone was smooth, but it had an edge, like a blade sheathed in velvet. "Everything all right?" he pressed. "Yes, sir." The sir landed heavier than usual, like she was building a wall out of formality. Ethan almost blurted it out. "I tested you. You passed." "I was wrong." But the words stayed trapped behind pride and the habit of control. That evening, he sat in the study with the safe closed, locked and humming quietly in its place. He told himself he'd imagined the shift in her behavior, but the truth was harder to swallow. He had caused it. His phone buzzed. A text from his friend Julian. "Drinks tonight? You look like you need to get out of your own head." Ethan almost declined, but something in him wanted distance from the estate, from the heavy air Amara left in her wake. At the bar, Julian laughed too loudly and flirted with the waitress, but Ethan barely heard him. His thoughts kept circling back to the image of Amara closing the safe, her jaw tight, her eyes shadowed. Julian finally asked, "What's eating you? You look like you lost a bet." Ethan smirked faintly. "Something like that." The next morning, Marta found Amara polishing the silver again, even though it gleamed. "You're going to rub a hole in that tray," Marta teased gently. Amara shrugged. "Better than sitting still." Marta gave her a knowing look. "You're upset with him." Amara paused, cloth in hand. "I'm not upset, just reminded." "Of what?" "That some people will never see you for who you are, only for what they're afraid you might be." Marta didn't push further, but her eyes softened with quiet sympathy. Later that day, Ethan caught Amara in the library, dusting the top shelves. "I've been thinking," he said. She didn't turn around. "About what, sir?" He hesitated. "About trust." Finally she faced him, her gaze steady but unreadable. "Trust is a two-way street." He nodded slowly, but before he could reply, her phone rang, a soft chime that seemed almost out of place in the quiet room. She glanced at the screen, then excused herself without another word. Ethan stood there, staring at the space she'd just occupied, feeling the conversation slip away like water through his fingers. That night, lying in bed, he told himself he'd drop it. He had more important things to focus on: investments, property acquisitions, a meeting with the mayor next week. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her hand pressing the safe shut, not taking, not tempted, just refusing. And somehow, that refusal felt like a judgment against him personally. When someone pulls away after being hurt, do you believe it's better to give them space or push for a conversation? Share your thoughts below. This is where the story could turn either way. The storm rolled in without warning, thick clouds swallowing the late afternoon light, wind howling like it had a score to settle. By the time Amara finished vacuuming the hallway rugs, the first thunderclap rattled the estate's high windows. Marta poked her head into the hall. "Road advisories are out. Power lines are down in the next county over. I'll head out now before it gets worse," Amara said, untying her apron. Marta frowned. "Driveway's already blocked. A maple came down across the lower bend. Grounds crew won't be able to clear it until morning." Before Amara could reply, Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the polished banister. "You're staying here tonight." His tone was more command than suggestion. Amara's spine stiffened. "I can walk down to the main road." "In this?" He gestured toward the window where rain lashed sideways against the glass. "You'd be soaked and probably flattened by a tree branch before you made it 100 yards. Her lips pressed together, the protest dying in her throat. She hated feeling cornered, especially by him. Marta busied herself making dinner, leaving the two of them in a silence that felt both fragile and unyielding. The dining table was set for 3, but when Marta excused herself early, muttering something about checking the generator, Ethan and Amara were left alone. He cleared his throat. "Sit. You've been on your feet all day." She sat, but her posture remained perfectly straight, like she was bracing for impact. They ate in near silence, the clink of silverware loud against the rain's constant drumbeat. Halfway through, Ethan spoke. "You ever get tired of the quiet here?" Her eyes lifted from her plate. "I'm used to quiet." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "Sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it's heavy." "Yeah," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Heavy's a good word for it." After dinner, the storm knocked the power out completely. Darkness swallowed the estate, broken only by the flicker of the fireplace Ethan lit in the study. Amara lingered in the doorway, unsure if she should retreat to the guest room or join him. He looked up from the fire. "You're welcome to sit. Safer than pacing dark hallways." She stepped inside slowly, perching on the far end of the leather sofa. The fire's crackle filled the space between them. Outside, branches scraped the windows, wind howling through unseen cracks. "You grew up here?" she asked suddenly. Ethan shook his head. "No. Bought it when the company went public. It felt like proof." "Proof of what?" "That I'd made it. That I was untouchable." He smirked faintly, gaze fixed on the flames. "Turns out being untouchable just means no one gets close." Amara studied him for a moment, then looked away. "Some people like it that way. Do you?" Her laugh was quiet, but humorless. "Doesn't matter what I like. You learn to live with what you're given." The fire popped, sending a small ember floating upward before it faded. Neither spoke for a while, but something in the air shifted, still heavy, but no longer impenetrable. When a particularly loud gust rattled the window pane, she glanced toward it, then back to him. "If this house blows away, I'm blaming you." The corner of his mouth lifted, just a fraction. Fair enough. It was the smallest crack in the wall between them, but it was there. "Have you ever been stuck with someone you were avoiding? And did it make things better or worse? Drop your story in the comments. I'm curious how that tension plays out in real life. The storm refused to let up. By morning, the estate grounds glistened with puddles, and branches littered the driveway like fallen matchsticks. The hum of the backup generator was the only sign of life besides the rain. Marta had driven her small SUV as far as the road allowed to meet her husband, leaving Ethan and Amara alone. After breakfast, Amara gathered the cleaning supplies, determined to busy herself. But when she passed the study, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Amara, come here a second." She stepped inside, wary. He was at the desk, a leather-bound photo album open in front of him. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "I still have rooms to—" "They'll wait." She hesitated, then sat. He turned the album toward her. Old photographs, grainy, sun-faded images of a boy in hand-me-down clothes standing in front of a rusted trailer. "That's me," Ethan said quietly. She blinked, glancing between him and the boy in the picture. "You grew up?" "In the middle of nowhere, with a father who drank more than he worked and a mother who disappeared before I could walk. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to take it, and if I wanted to keep it, I'd have to protect it from everyone, because sooner or later, they'd try to take it back." His tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes stayed fixed on the photographs as if looking at her might make the admission too raw. Amara leaned back slightly. "That's why you don't trust anyone." "That's why I test people," he corrected, though the word sounded hollow even to him. She let a long moment pass before speaking. "You know what I learned early?" He met her gaze, waiting. "That your word is the only thing you can't afford to lose. Money comes and goes. Jobs too. But if people stop believing your word, you've got nothing." It wasn't said with heat or anger, just a quiet conviction that landed heavier than any accusation. Ethan didn't reply immediately. He studied her, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the version he'd been keeping in his head. "Is that why you shut the safe?" he asked finally. Her brows rose. "I shut the safe because it wasn't mine to open, not because I thought you'd thank me for it." The air between them tightened, but it wasn't quite hostility. It was truth. They spent the rest of the morning in the study, him leafing through the album, her dusting the shelves in a slower, more thoughtful rhythm. Around noon, when the rain eased to a drizzle, they moved to the kitchen. Ethan boiled water for tea, a rare gesture from a man who usually had everything prepared for him. He set the steaming mug in front of her. "For the record, you've given me more reason to trust you than anyone in years." She looked at him for a long moment before replying, "Then, maybe stop looking for reasons not to." It wasn't a truce, not yet, but it was the first bridge built between two very stubborn shores. If someone from your past shaped the way you trust, or don't trust, people now, what happened? Share if you're comfortable. Stories like that are often more relatable than we think. By late afternoon, the storm had softened to a gentle rain, and the estate felt oddly peaceful. The constant hum of the generator had faded into the background, replaced by the steady drip of water from the gutters outside. Amara was in the kitchen, carefully slicing bread for sandwiches, when Ethan walked in carrying a dusty box. "What's that?" she asked. "Board games," he said, with an almost sheepish shrug. "Figured we could try not sitting in separate rooms pretending we don't exist." Her brows arched. "You play board games?" "I used to," he said, setting the box on the counter. "Mostly when the power went out, back when the only entertainment we had was candles and a deck of cards." There was something almost boyish in the way he said it. They ended up in the study with a game of Scrabble spread out between them, the fire once again crackling in the hearth. At first the conversation was sparse, the occasional word about the tiles on the board, but slowly something shifted. When Ethan placed the word wealthy across a triple word score, Amara smirked. "Shocking choice." "You could challenge it," he teased. "I'm more interested in making lonely intersect it," she replied, laying her tiles down with a quiet satisfaction. He chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not polite, not measured, just real. As the game went on, they drifted into stories. Ethan told her about the time he and Julian, as teenagers, had tried to borrow a neighbor's canoe and ended up sinking it in the middle of a lake. Amara laughed so hard she had to set her tiles down. "I can't imagine you in a canoe. You probably wore cufflinks." "I was 14, he said, grinning. "I didn't own cufflinks. Yet." In turn, she told him about her younger sister Maya, how she'd worked 3 jobs to put her through nursing school, how Maya had been the reason she never let her pride slip, no matter how bad things got. "That's incredible," he said softly. "You did all that for her?" "She's family," Amara replied simply, as though that was all the explanation needed. The rain picked up again after sunset, but inside the air was warmer, not from the fire, but from the ease that had settled between them. At one point, when the power flickered and the lights dimmed, Ethan rose to light more candles. The glow caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them in ways Amara hadn't seen before. "You ever think," he said, as he set a candle on the table, "that maybe the people we trust the least are the ones we should give the most chance to prove us wrong?" Her gaze held his for a long moment. "And you ever think that if you stopped testing people, you might find out they were worth trusting all along?" Neither looked away first. By the time they packed up the game, the room smelled faintly of melting wax and wood smoke. It was the first time in 2 years Amara had lingered in the study after finishing her work, and the first time Ethan had wanted her to. And for both of them, that realization felt like the beginning of something they weren't ready to name. "Do you think lighter moments are the key to rebuilding trust? Or do serious conversations do more? Share your thoughts. This debate is as old as relationships themselves. The next morning brought clear skies, sunlight streaming through the estate's high windows like a quiet promise that the storm had passed. Ethan found himself in the kitchen earlier than usual, brewing coffee. Amara walked in, hair slightly looser than normal, her expression calm. They exchanged a small, unspoken smile, an acknowledgement of the strange, unplanned companionship the storm had forced on them. It might have been a good day. It should have been. Until the doorbell rang. Ethan opened the door to find Clara standing there, his ex-fiancée, perfectly styled, lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," she said, stepping inside without invitation, "you still live in this museum of yours." "What do you want, Clara?" Ethan asked, his voice cool. "I was in town. Thought I'd drop by, catch up." Her gaze drifted toward the kitchen, where Amara had just set down a tray of clean glasses. Clara's smile sharpened. "And who's this?" Before Ethan could answer, Clara continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "I see you've diversified your staff. Very progressive of you." Amara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Ethan's stomach knotted. He should have spoken up immediately, shut Clara down, made it clear her words were unacceptable. But the old reflex to keep situations controlled, to avoid direct conflict, froze him for just a second too long. And in that second, Clara's smirk deepened. "I suppose someone has to dust all this wealth you hoard." Amara didn't flinch, didn't respond. She simply placed the last glass in the cupboard, nodded politely to Ethan, and walked past both of them toward the service entrance. "Amara," Ethan started, but she didn't stop. The sound of the door clicking shut behind her landed like a gunshot. Clara laughed softly. "Oh, did I interrupt something?" Ethan turned on her, voice low but sharp. "Get out." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Get out." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she shrugged and sauntered toward the door. "Suit yourself. Still touchy, I see." The moment she was gone, Ethan's chest felt too tight. He replayed the scene in his mind, every second of his hesitation magnified until it was unbearable. He found Amara in the staff parking area, unlocking her car. "Amara, wait," he said, approaching quickly. She didn't look at him. "I'm not upset about her, Ethan. I'm upset about you." The words landed like a slap. "You didn't say anything," she continued, her voice steady but charged. "You let her talk to me like that, and you said nothing. 2 days ago you were telling me I'd given you reason to trust me, and today you let someone treat me like I'm less than a person." His mouth opened, but no defense came out. She shook her head. "I've dealt with that my whole life. I don't need it where I work, and I definitely don't need it from someone who claims to see me differently." With that, she got in her car and drove away, leaving him standing in the sunlight that suddenly felt as cold as marble. Back in the study, Ethan sat in silence. The safe loomed in the corner, closed and locked, but now it seemed to mock him. He had tested her once, and she had passed. Now, when he had been tested, he had failed. And he wasn't sure she'd give him another chance. If someone stayed silent when they should have defended you, could you forgive them? Or would that silence speak louder than any apology? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your take. The estate felt emptier than usual, not just quiet, hollow. Ethan sat in the study that evening, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the desk. Clara's words had faded, but Amara's, those stayed. "I'm upset about you." It wasn't anger in her voice that haunted him. It was disappointment, the kind that said he had confirmed her worst expectations. He'd spent years convincing himself that his guardedness protected him. But now he could see the truth. It had made him a coward. For the first time in a long time, he didn't try to think his way through the problem. He just felt it. The shame, the regret, the fear that this might be beyond repair. He thought of the way she had shut the safe, the way she had sat across from him in the candlelight, teasing him over a board game, the way she had told him to stop looking for reasons not to trust her, and then the way she had walked away without looking back. By morning, the decision was made. Ethan drove to the city, his car cutting through the light fog that clung to the streets. He parked outside a modest brick apartment building, the kind where tenants hung plants in the windows and kids rode scooters on the sidewalk. He climbed the narrow stairwell to the third floor and knocked on the door marked 3B. It opened a crack. Amara's eyes appeared first, cautious. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk." "I'm not interested in excuses." "Good," he said quickly, "because I don't have one. I only have the truth, and it's this." I froze. I let my pride and my old habits get in the way. I should have defended you. I should have shut her down before she finished her sentence. She studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you?" "Because for years I've been afraid of conflict, afraid that letting my guard down would make me lose something. But I realized yesterday that I lost something anyway. I lost you." She opened the door a little wider but didn't invite him in. "You don't know me well enough to lose me," she said softly. "I know enough," he replied. "Enough to know I trust you more than anyone. Enough to know I care about you, not as an employee, not as someone who passed my stupid test, but as someone I want in my life." Her gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted again. "Words are easy, Ethan." He nodded. "Then let me prove it." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. She didn't take it right away, but her eyes flicked to it. "It's not jewelry," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver key. "What is that?" "The spare key to my safe," he said quietly. "Because the truth is, you've had it all along. This just makes it official." Silence stretched between them. The hum of the city filtered in from the street below. Car horns, distant voices, the rattle of the L train. Finally, Amara reached out and took the box. "This doesn't fix everything," she said. "I know," he replied, "but maybe it can be a start." For the first time since the storm, her expression softened. "Give me time," she said, "as much as you need." When she closed the door, Ethan didn't feel the sting of rejection. He felt the weight of a choice made, and the quiet hope that it might be the right one. If someone admits their failure and makes a real effort to change, do you think trust can fully return, or is it never the same? Share your view. This is one of the toughest calls in any relationship. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of polite but brief conversations at work, 2 weeks of Ethan giving her space. No grand gestures, no forced apologies, just quiet consistency. Amara noticed the difference. He no longer hovered near the study door when she came to clean it. He no longer locked the safe when she was in the room, even if he stepped away. He even started brewing extra coffee in the mornings, leaving a steaming mug on the counter with her name written on a sticky note. She never said thank you aloud, but she drank it every time. One Friday evening, after the last of the staff had left, Amara was gathering her things when Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He led her to the garden, where the last traces of sunset bled into the horizon. The air was cool, scented faintly with roses and damp earth. "I wanted to show you something," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it to find a letter, formal at first, but quickly giving way to something more personal. "I am sorry I made you feel small. I am sorry I hesitated when you needed me to stand tall. You have shown me more integrity than most people I've known in my life, and I would be a fool to risk losing that again." Amara read it twice, her fingers tracing the words. "You wrote this?" "I needed you to have it in writing," he said with a small smile. "In case I ever forget, you can remind me." They stood there in silence for a moment, the garden lights flickering on one by one. "I'm not used to people admitting they're wrong," she said finally. "I'm not used to admitting it," he replied, "but for you, I'm willing to get used to it." A laugh escaped her, soft but genuine. "You're still a little full of yourself." "And you're still not afraid to tell me," he said. She handed the letter back, but he shook his head. "It's yours, keep it." Her gaze held his for a long moment, and in that stillness, something shifted. Not a dramatic revelation, but the quiet certainty that the walls between them were no longer unscalable. "I trust you," she said. The words simple but weighted. And for Ethan, it felt like the most valuable thing he had ever been given. They walked back toward the house together, their steps unhurried. At the back door, he paused. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Not here. Somewhere with good food and bad lighting." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "We'll see." But when she walked away, there was no coldness in it, just the promise that she might say yes. Inside, the study waited, safe closed but unlocked. The key he had given her was nowhere in sight, yet he knew she still had it. That was enough. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a home. Do you believe love and trust can grow stronger after being tested, or is the first crack always there? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to know your perspective.